What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I'm your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously, both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode, and this is going to be an interesting one. This started out as a deep dive into all of the bottlenecks that I believe are, creating problems for us as a nation. In terms of, for example, the planning system is super slow. You've also got the national power grid is now under pressure, I should say. You've also got, I saw headlines in the paper during the week that Ryanair is giving out about the Dublin airport cap on passenger numbers coming into the country. But in addition to that, I just read yesterday that this week the Dublin airport car park was actually full. So you go on holiday, you arrive at the car park, and sorry, there is no spaces. What do? You're rushing for a flight. All of this stuff, it seems kind of crazy that we're not slightly ahead of ourselves and that we're not kind of dealing with this stuff. So I was researching all of these issues, and I was kind of building up a list of things that I wanted to talk about. And then I came across this talk about the national power grid. And when I got into that, I noticed that there is actually a de facto moratorium at the moment on the creation or the building of new data centers in the Dublin region. And this led me into finding out that Amazon is currently lobbying the government about needing to build more data centers and that they need this to happen for their expansion and all this kind of stuff. And there's another article I found in the paper, and it is that there is currently a 1.2 billion euro data center that is planned to be built in County Clare, and it is currently being held up in the planning system by objectors who are, using all sorts of environmental concerns as their main reason. And so this got me, looking into the role of data centers in a lot more detail and thinking about it from the point of Ireland's economic future and what is the direction we're going? If we can't build more data centers, what does that mean? Why should we be considering the construction of more data centers and all of this stuff? And as I was reviewing this, and this is kind of the direction I was thinking of taking this podcast episode. And then I stumbled upon a paper that was written. It's very recently published, and it's written by a chap that has just been fired by OpenAI. Now, OpenAI, for those of you who are not aware, is the creator of ChatGPT. And this is all about artificial intelligence and all this. And this paper that he's written, it's called Situational Awareness. And the guy's name is Leopold Aschenbrenner. And I will go and put a link to the article down below if you want to check it out. But this blew my mind, and it is staggering what is coming in the next, as little as 5 years away. All of this is coming, and it's coming very, very quickly. And so I think it's going to blow your mind too. And at the very end of this, what I plan to do is bring it all back and connect it back to the Irish economy and the risks, but also, as I think that it could be, the opportunities that it presents. And so let's get into it. Let's start out with artificial intelligence. The past decade has just seen the most incredible advances in artificial intelligence. And it's often easy to forget just how quick we are moving. When you found, I discovered ChatGPT around about Christmas 2022. And I can remember having friends over for Christmas dinner or maybe New Year's, whenever it was. And I remember playing around with ChatGPT 3.5. And it blew my mind. You could ask it to create poetry and all this kind of stuff. And it came out like that. And then it wasn't very long that after that ChatGPT 4 came out. And now I'm currently using ChatGPT 4 Turbo. And it all is happening so fast, but these incremental changes, they don't seem to get recognized by us. The advances, though, are insane. Just 4 years ago, the GPT models that these guys were working on were barely able to string a sentence together. They put the education level at preschool grade kind of level, that it was, say, kind of like a 3-year-old speaking level. And this kind of thing is now able to, quote literature. It's able to write poetry. It is now able to do better in the legal bar exams in America than 99% of all applicants. It is now able to pass all of the university entrance exams with absolute 99 percentile kind of. And so we've come in just 4 years. It has expanded from preschool level education to the level now where it is beating everybody. And that is just going to continue to go at that same pace. And so all of the charts, if you look at these various charts, they point to the growth and just the continuing straight line, almost vertical, of this growth. And the predictions all point to about 2.5 years away, maybe 3 years away, we will have what's termed artificial general intelligence, AGI. And the idea of AGI, like, it's great having ChatGPT on your computer and stuff, but AGI will be where you can speak in normal language to your computer or your phone or your device or whatever, and anything you ask it, it can organize and do. So book me a flight to go on holidays with the family, organized. I'd like you to go and do a research paper on such and such a thing, organized. Straight, not to have to kind of work in all of these details with different systems, and all. The whole thing will just simply be like having an assistant sitting beside you, working away, and a very smart assistant at that who can work 24 hours a day. Now, that sounds a bit far-fetched, but this is literally 2027. That is when all of the lines that are on these charts point to. And so AGI, that is what's coming. We're going to have the situation where you just simply, whatever you need from your computer or your phone or whatever, you just simply speak to it and it'll organize that. And it won't be like the crappy Siri that we've had on our phones in the last few years where it, mispronounced words and all that. It's going to understand everything and the context, and it'll know all about your history and everything like that. Once this happens, it is going to fundamentally alter so many industries that it is absolutely hard to imagine. And a lot of those industries are absolutely critical to Ireland's economic development, and specifically like tech companies and data centers. But what's kind of scary is this is actually, we're not talking about a bit of competition here. This is going to turn into an all-out race, because what we're talking about here is massive economic advantages, not to mention defense advantages, military advantages. This entire thing is going to transform the world. And when you think about that, we're not talking about a little bit of healthy competition between, Apple and Meta or something like that, or Facebook versus, LinkedIn. We're talking about a new industrial revolution. And it will be a little bit like the mobilization of the industries prior to World War II. Once World War II kicked off, it doesn't matter what your factory does, you're now making weapons, you're now building ships, you're now building tanks. And that is the kind of thing we're looking at, where there are now trillions of dollars being poured into this globally. And it's going in at such a rate. I mean, this paper that this guy Leopold put out, he's saying that every time the board meet, they're adding another zero to their plans. And they're now talking about Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI. There are rumors that he is currently in the market trying to raise $7 trillion. And they're looking at building data centers that would be, 1 million times larger than anything that currently exists. And when you hear things like that, you go, my God, this is just incredible. And so the problem with these huge data centers they're talking about is the power that they require is just off the charts. And what they're saying is that America alone is going to need to increase its power production capacity by about 20% just to feed these new data centers. And, that presents a major challenge for Ireland, because we currently have a bit of a, pressure on us around power generation. And we have all the demands coming for these data centers. And these data centers, the power that they need is really, really, is very, very demanding. And so this is just the tip of the iceberg, the current situation where you've got Amazon lobbying the government and saying, we need more data centers. A year from now, or even 2 years from now, it's absolutely going to be enormous pressure for this kind of thing to take place. And to give you an idea of, our energy infrastructure, it's taken about 100 years to get to the level that we're currently at. And over that period of time, there's been power stations that started off with peat and turf, and then they moved on to coal, and then they moved on to hydro, and then they moved on to gas burning. And, you've got Poolbeg and Moneypoint and all these places. And now we have the big wind generators that are off the coast and stuff. And that's the way it's going. A lot of these wind generation things are very important because we need renewable energy rather than burning gas and stuff. But the problem is that there's also this huge environmental push back, and you've got a lot of areas of conservation being created off the coast. So the areas where these big wind farms would be put are now being basically ruled out as not possible. In addition to that, I heard a very interesting fact yesterday that a lot of the data centers that are being built in Ireland at the moment, they're being built without the need for a special industrial license because they have separate power supplies. They have a power supply in case they can't get access to the grid. And the power supply would be like a big generator, we'll say a diesel generator. It comes on and it starts burning diesel, and it keeps the data center running until such time as the grid can reconnect or whatever. And they always, when they were submitting plans for these, they always were under the impression that, look, this is just a fail-safe in the event, in the rare occasion where there could be a disconnection from the power grid, we would be able to turn on these. And so it wasn't deemed necessary. Now it is a requirement, and that is because the grid is under such pressure that it's basically guaranteed that these data centers are going to be having to rely on their diesel generators. And so that just gives you a small indication of what is happening. And then just look at the planning system. Like, nothing can get done quickly in this country. It's a major, major bottleneck. All of these major, infrastructure projects just take years and years to develop. Look at the metro being talked about for over nearly 20 years now. And we're talking about probably having to create the capacity to build at least 50% more energy production than we currently have. And if you consider it's taken 100 years to get to where we are today, we have 5 years to increase that by about another 50%. And this is where, this is at a time when the government is dealing with housing crisis and the refugee influx and all of this stuff. So can you imagine trying to juggle all of these different needs? And at the same time, we've got the environmental concerns, and those are real concerns as well. So the environment, you've got the future power consumption, you've got the requirement of the tech companies that keep our economy going. They're going to need more data centers, or what? Will they pull out? Will they leave? We also have a housing crisis. This is all pushing us to kind of a difficult position. So it's definitely a risk. Now, Ireland has got a really, really impressive economy at the moment. I mean, we are largely driven by foreign direct investment, FDI, and they're all attracted by our tax rate, and they're attracted by our highly skilled workforce, and the fact that we're English speaking does not harm us, especially when it comes to dealing with American giants like the tech companies and stuff. And so we're doing so well today as an economy. And I know individually we might not feel that we're doing so well, but as an economy, the GDP of this country is far, far greater than most others. I think we're in second or third place in the world when you compare us against the likes of Qatar or Norway. And so much so that we actually now have a surplus of a windfall, basically, of tax coming in, to the point of we're now at a 23 billion surplus. And so much so that the government is creating a sovereign wealth fund. Imagine Ireland having a sovereign wealth fund. 15 years ago, we were bankrupted. We had the IMF and the EU coming in to basically like run the country's finances. And all these years later, here we are, and we now actually have a surplus of 23 billion. But there are enormous risks ahead. And I mentioned those bottlenecks that could jeopardize all of this. The slow planning process, all of these things. You're talking about major infrastructure projects that are needed like yesterday. And we have the slow system that takes years to get things done. And all of this is happening in a period of history where everything is speeding up and is moving incredibly rapidly. Now, getting into this paper, Situational Awareness, it's actually quite hair-raising in a few places. It's just been published, and he explains the breakneck speed of change and the fact that the guys in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, like those guys are at the heart of it and they know exactly what's going on. And he was working in OpenAI as one of these safety researchers. And he has come out and made this. He was fired. Apparently, he's accused of leaking information. And he says he was leaking information because he was trying to make the board aware of just how dangerous things are getting. He says that AI is being built, and behind the scene, they're looking at trillion-dollar data centers. So big, I mentioned this already, so big that they would consume 20% of all US power production. But even more scary is he describes what is likely to happen after 2027. So once we have this companion living on our computer that can do anything that we ask, you're going to have something that is effectively as intelligent as a university postgraduate, like somebody who's done a doctorate in research and an engineering degree, and you're going to have somebody that can work 24 hours a day. And what is that going to do? That is, at the moment, the constraint on these big data companies, these big companies that are working on AI, the constraint is that they cannot hire enough graduates and students and doctorates and PhDs. They cannot hire enough of these to actually do the research that they need to do. So it takes longer because they only have it spread over a couple of thousand staff. But when you suddenly hit AGI, you can now scale things up. And instead of having, we'll say, 1,000 graduate students from Harvard University and all, Yale and all of the big ones in America, what you'll suddenly have is push a button and now you have 500,000 student level intelligence. And suddenly everything can get compressed, all of the timeframes. You've got 500,000 brains as intelligent as anyone coming out of Harvard, or probably more so, coming out at the same time, 500,000 of them all stacked in your data center, and they work 24 hours a day. How quick do you think the problems that you currently have will get solved when you have that kind of mental firepower? And so this is called a feedback loop. And what it means is that 10 years of research and development can get compressed into as little as a year, or maybe even 6 months. And suddenly we are in what he's referring to as an intelligence explosion. This is where it'll be everywhere. It'll be just so obvious that we are in the intelligence era. And he likens this to the moment just before the creation of the nuclear bomb, that everyone was trying desperately to build the bomb because they wanted to have the advantage. And America got there first, and then it stopped the war. And he says that now we're in a situation where the US and China are highly focused on this, because when you have that compression of all of that research and it gets compressed into a year, suddenly, and with all of the compute power, these data centers are referred to as compute. And so the power is needed to power them, but then they're there, and instead of having 1,000 computer, they have these racks full of servers and stuff. Instead of having 1,000 or 10,000, they'll have 1 million. And so the power of this will give birth to super intelligence. And that is, he says, likely going to be around 2030, if not be sooner. And he says, when you have super intelligence, that is when it can now outmaneuver and outthink all adversaries. So whoever gets there first is the winner and takes all effectively. And so you can see why it's being described as a little bit like the development of the nuclear bomb. Having that kind of technical, economic advantage over your adversaries is effectively like a massive military advantage as well. And so the author really, he does like go on into the fact that the Manhattan Project, where Oppenheimer, we all saw this movie last year that came out, he developed it, and they were all marshalling all of their resources. And that was World War II. They had all of the industry all basically focused on, let's produce this. At the time, there was uranium, and they could only produce a tiny amount of it. And they got everyone working around the clock on producing enough of it to be able to create that first bomb. Now, what's amazing about it is that the pace then moved so quickly that that first bomb, which was so devastating, within 7 years, they had a bomb that was 1 million times more powerful than that. And they said that the bomb, the single weapon, the hydrogen bomb that was created 7 years later, that was the equivalent of 1,000 times all of the weapons and bombs that were used in World War II combined. It's 1,000 times more powerful than everything that took place in that war. And so you can see that was the dawn of the nuclear age. And suddenly everything changed, and now you have all these pacts not to use them because it is so devastating. This super intelligence that we're moving towards, they really do believe that will be similar because it'll give you such an advantage. And so, sure enough, what does this mean? Well, this means that you're going to have an industrial mobilization that we haven't seen anything the likes of in 80 years. And data is going to become the new oil. And so we're going to be entering into a data boom and an intelligence boom. And anyone who can produce the data centers, it is effectively going to be like having discovered oil. That's my opinion. Now, obviously, there's a whole other discussion around superintelligence. I'm not even going to go there, but just to say, he does, in this paper, he does go into the fact that when you create a superintelligence that is vastly more intelligent than you or anyone that works in your company, how do you control that? Like, do you say, oh, we don't want you to go and do this? It could already have thought 5 moves ahead of you. And so there is all of this. They basically are of the view that it's all happening so quickly, and humans are used to moving at a linear pace, and this is moving at an exponential pace. And how do we put the safety measures in place when you're dealing with something that is moving so quickly? How do you know whether or not you've put in the right safety measures if this thing is more intelligent than you are? It's kind of crazy just to think about it. So anyway, we're entering this data boom, and similar to the oil boom. And so how do we bring this back to Ireland? Well, what does it mean for the economy? At the moment, we are the headquarters for almost all big tech firms around the world. They all, like most of them are all US based, but they all have headquarters in Ireland. Why? Because of our tax regime here. And we have the highly skilled workforce, as I've already mentioned. We're also an English-speaking nation on the edge of Europe, so we have access to the European market. And I think that we're looking at the economy over the next couple of years. This is potentially, if we play our cards right, this is like a windfall that could be similar to when the oil economies of the Middle East discovered that they had oil. I mean, you have places like Dubai back in the 1960s or 50s. That was like a fishing village. Look at it today. And that is what these countries are capable of when they get it right. And so those guys, they happen to be sitting on huge volumes of oil, gas, all that. Saudi Arabia, Doha. I spent a year living in Doha. I spent a couple of years living in Dubai. All of those places, remarkable places, but all built off the back of this oil. And we are potentially, as a country, on the cusp of being right in the middle of this data boom that's about to kick off. And so that is a massive advantage. Like, we're talking about 23 billion surplus today. If this kicks off, and if it like generates the kind of economic benefits that they're talking about, it could be that we have 30 or 50 billion going into a sovereign wealth fund every year. We could be like the next Norway that has so much money it doesn't know what to do with it. Or, and this is the big or we could fail miserably. We could basically argue and bicker and fight and delay everything and just keep on going around in circles with our planning system and with our protesters and with all of these people out there saying, you can't build this, not in my backyard, I don't want this, I don't want that. It's really, I don't think that these big tech firms are going to sit around and watch us solve our problems while they are facing an existential threat. Anybody who remember, like if you're old enough, you remember there was a company called MySpace. MySpace came out before Facebook. It won the race and it came out before Facebook. But Facebook was better, had better algorithms, whatever it was, and it's gone to history. That's it. It doesn't exist anymore. A lot of you, if you're old enough, will remember there was a company called Blockbuster. Blockbuster used to have video stores. You used to go in and you used to pick up your VCR cassette and you used to watch a video at home, and then you would bring it back the next day and you had to pay for that. Those video stores were super popular. Here in Ireland, it was referred to as Extravision. And that firm was worth 2 billion when Netflix was formed. And a couple of years later, Reed Hastings, who is the guy that created Netflix, is it Reed Hastings? I'm thinking that. Anyway, he went and he asked Blockbuster to buy them out, and he offered it up for 50 million. And the guys in Blockbuster basically laughed him out of the door and said that they were gonna steamroll him. Today, Netflix is worth, I don't know what it's worth, 30 billion or something like that, and Blockbuster went bankrupt. And then you can also talk about Kodak. Kodak was the big camera company back in the day. Ironically, one of their own engineers discovered the digital camera, but they didn't pay any attention to it. And sure enough, they thought that they were in the business of processing film. That's what they thought. They made the film that goes in the camera, the rolls, and you took your photos and then you brought them in and you gave them to produce. That's what Kodak believed their business was, instead of the business of creating images. And so when the digital camera came along, they suddenly went out of business. A company that was worth 124 years old and that had something like 130,000 people working for it, it went bankrupt. That same year it went bankrupt, Instagram was bought by Facebook for 1.2 billion, and it was 18 months old and it had 12 people working for it. Just shows you this kind of stuff moves so quickly that these big firms, they are worried that they will be overlapped like that, and that you could face a situation where these companies suddenly become irrelevant and disappear, and years from now they're gone. You've never even heard of them. So that is the worry that these companies have, and they are simply not going to sit around while we go and figure this stuff out. They are going to move to another economy if they need to. You only have to look at NVIDIA. NVIDIA is the chip maker that makes all of the chips that go into these AI models. It has just passed out Apple and Microsoft and all these other companies. It is now the most valuable company in the world, worth 3 trillion. And it has risen 590,000% in value in the last 5 or 6 years. This gives you an idea of what is ahead of us. And so we really have to think about this and make sure we do not screw it up, and really work hard on getting everything aligned so that these guys do not look abroad and say, you know what, we can do better. We can work with a country that can sort out its problems faster. So what has Ireland got going for it? Well, we have the attractive tax rate. We have the highly skilled workforce. I keep going on about it. But that is just not going to be enough to retain these big tech firms if they cannot expand their data centers when they require it. And we have got to figure out how we're going to get those permits and get the power plants built to actually enable all of this. And I think this is a major, major risk for us, because like what's fueling all of the economy at the moment is the big tech firms, mostly speaking. I mean, pharmaceutical companies, like they're all here for this tax rate. But the tax rate will not be what drives the next decision. It'll be around data and the fact that the power requirements for the data are just not capable in this country. There's all sorts of other security risks that we have to think about as well. I mean, these are not as interesting to think about from a property investment point of view, but as a kind of government, they'll have to start thinking about security and defense, and the fact that if I read there recently, the FBI has said that China has now got a larger spy or espionage operation than all of the other developed nations combined. That is just one spy agency, that is the Chinese one. And so their job is going to be obtain the secrets, figure out how to get the algorithms, figure out how to find all of these secrets that have been developed in these labs in America. And if they're here in Ireland, they'll be looking to go and crack these things. This is a serious issue. And this goes back to a little bit like if you go back to the whole point about it being like the nuclear bomb, we're looking at creating this super intelligence, which will eventually be the most powerful weapon on earth, and the ability to outthink and outmaneuver everybody. And your factories then actually can start to build themselves and improve themselves. So these I'm not even going to go on to it. It's just because you can actually see it perhaps sort of spiraling into something a little bit like the movie The Matrix. But I think at the moment, the big thing is US and China, their interests are not aligned. They're both vying for dominance when it comes to AI. And the fact is, we're kind of sitting there right in the middle of all this as the country that is the home for so many of these big tech firms. So in conclusion, I think we're in a pivotal moment. The next decade, my God, what is it going to look like? If we don't get this right, we could really squander the opportunity of not just a lifetime, of 10 lifetimes. Imagine if you knew that there's oil under the ground. If you're going back 100 years, you know that there's oil under the ground. What would you do to protect that, to ensure that you were going to marshal the resources of the nation to make sure that you accessed all of that? We've got to harness this opportunity, in my opinion, because if we don't, I think it's also probably the biggest risk that we face. And if all of these, I mean, Intel employs 6,500 people in the leak slip area, in the Dublin greater area. If we get into a situation where they're no longer going to stay here, I mean, they've invested billions, but if they think that there's no future here, well, that'll be it. They just pull up and go. And so I think we really have to think about this. We can't sit back and squabble over power and protest over all of these things. This is literally trillions of investment and tens of thousands of jobs at stake. So guys, a bit of a scary one. I hope you found it eye-opening at the very least. And if not a little scary, I wish you all a great weekend, and I will see you back here next week. Take care. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. If you enjoyed the show or found it in any way useful, could I please ask you to take a moment to leave a review over on iTunes or Spotify. This really helps us get the podcast out in front of more people. If you have any questions or topics you would like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via my brand new school community. You will find a link in the show notes. You can stay up to date with all of my content and the projects I'm working on by signing up for my weekly newsletter over on my website, gavinjgallagher.com. That's all for now. See you back here, same time next week.